The evening sun cast long shadows across the living room as Lily hurried to set the table. Sunday family dinners were a tradition in the Taylor household, but they filled her with dread rather than joy. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the silverware, knowing that no matter how perfectly she placed each fork and knife, her father would find something wrong. "Those napkins are crooked," Thomas called from his armchair without looking up from his newspaper. "Can't you do anything right?" Lily's cheeks burned as she quickly adjusted the cloth napkins. At 23, she'd graduated college with honors and landed a decent job at a local marketing firm, yet in her father's home, she still felt like a clumsy child. She straightened her shoulders and tried to ignore the familiar ache in her chest. "Dinner's almost ready," her mother Grace called from the kitchen, her voice carrying a forced cheerfulness that did nothing to ease the tension. The front door opened and Lily felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Grandpa?" she exclaimed, hurrying to help her grandfather with his coat. Edward Taylor, a tall man with kind eyes and silver hair, smiled warmly at his granddaughter. At 76, he moved more slowly these days, but his mind remained sharp. "There's my favorite girl," he said, giving her a one-armed hug while balancing a homemade apple pie in his other hand. "You're just in time," Lily said, taking the pie and lowering her voice. "Dad's in one of his moods," Edward nodded knowingly. He'd been noticing the way his son-in-law treated Lily for years, but lately, it seemed to be getting worse. What had once been occasional criticism had evolved into constant belittlement. The way Thomas spoke to Lily was different from how he addressed everyone else, including her younger brother Alex, who could seemingly do no wrong in their father's eyes. "Dinner's on the table," Grace announced, carrying a steaming casserole to the dining room. They gathered around the table, Thomas at the head, Grace to his right, Alex beside her, and Lily and Edward across from them. Grace had prepared Thomas's favorite meal, pot roast with potatoes and carrots. The food looked delicious, but Lily found it hard to have an appetite with her stomach tied in knots. "So, Lily," Thomas began as he cut into his meat, "how's that little job of yours going?" Lily took a deep breath. "It's going well. I've been put in charge of a new client account and entry level, right?" Thomas interrupted, not looking up from his plate. "When I was your age, I was already managing an entire department." "It's actually a mid-level position," Lily corrected softly. "They promoted me last month," Thomas scoffed. "Must not be much competition then." Edward watched as Lily seemed to shrink in her chair, pushing food around her plate. He noticed Grace's slight wince and the way she quickly changed the subject. "Alex has great news," Grace said brightly. "Tell everyone about your baseball scholarship, honey." As Alex launched into his story, Edward observed how Thomas's entire demeanor changed. He sat up straighter, his eyes shining with pride as Alex described the college scouts who had attended his recent game. "That's my boy," Thomas boomed, reaching over to ruffle Alex's hair. "Athletic and smart. You're going places, son." Edward glanced at Lily, who was smiling at her brother, genuinely happy for him despite her own pain. It broke his heart to see how she tried so hard to be supportive of everyone else when no one, except him, seemed to offer her the same courtesy. "Lily was telling me about her promotion," Edward said during a lull in the conversation. "She's the youngest account manager in her company's history." "Is that right?" Thomas said with a dismissive wave. "Well, marketing isn't exactly rocket science, is it? Anyone can make pretty pictures and write catchy slogans." "Dad," Alex protested. "Lily works really hard." Thomas snorted. "Sure she does. Remember when she wanted to be a doctor? Gave up on that dream pretty quick when she realized how much work it would take." "I didn't give up," Lily said quietly. "I changed my mind after volunteering at the hospital and realizing I was more interested in healthcare communication than practice." "That's what people say when they can't cut it," Thomas replied. "No shame in admitting you weren't smart enough for medical school." Grace placed a hand on her husband's arm. "Thomas, please, let's just enjoy our dinner." Edward noticed the tears forming in Lily's eyes that she rapidly blinked away. He'd seen this scene play out too many times before. Thomas cutting Lily down, Grace making a weak attempt to intervene, and Lily retreating further into herself. After dinner, as they gathered in the living room for coffee and Edward's apple pie, Thomas continued his subtle jabs. When Lily mentioned a book she'd recently read, Thomas questioned whether she'd understood it properly. When she showed photos of her new apartment, he pointed out all the improvements she should make rather than congratulating her on the achievement. Edward watched as each comment landed like a small knife, slowly carving away at Lily's self-worth. What bothered him most was how normal it had become, how no one seemed to notice or care about the pattern anymore. It had been happening for so long that the family had accepted it as just how Thomas is with Lily. Later, as Edward helped Lily wash the dishes while the others watched a football game, he saw her hands trembling again. "You know," he said gently, "your father's opinion isn't the only one that matters." Lily gave him a sad smile. "I know that logically, Grandpa, but somehow his is the only one I can't seem to ignore." Edward dried a plate slowly. "Have you ever wondered why he's so much harder on you than on Alex?" "Because Alex is perfect," Lily replied automatically. Then after a moment's reflection, she added, "Or maybe because I remind him of himself in ways he doesn't like." Edward raised an eyebrow, surprised by her insight. "I've given it a lot of thought," Lily continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dad always talks about his success, but he never shares any stories about struggles or failures. It's like he's afraid to admit he's ever been anything less than perfect." "That's very perceptive," Edward said. Lily shrugged. "Doesn't make it hurt any less when he puts me down in front of everyone." From the living room, they heard Thomas's booming laugh at something on the television, followed by Alex joining in. Grace appeared in the doorway looking tired. "You two have been hiding in here for ages," she said, forcing a smile. "Come join us for the game." "I should actually get going," Lily said, drying her hands. "I have an early meeting tomorrow." "Running away again?" Thomas called from the living room. "You never stay anymore. Too busy for family these days?" Lily closed her eyes briefly before responding. "Not running away, Dad. Just being responsible about my work commitments." "Let me walk you to your car," Edward offered, glaring briefly at his son-in-law. Outside in the cool evening air, Lily finally let her composure slip. A single tear rolled down her cheek as she fumbled for her car keys. "I don't know why I keep coming back," she admitted. "Nothing I do is ever good enough for him." Edward placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "This isn't about you, Lily. It never has been." "Then why does it feel so personal?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Because he makes it personal," Edward replied. "But trust me when I say this is about his issues, not yours." Lily hugged her grandfather tightly. "You're the only one who sees it, you know. Mom just pretends everything is fine, and Alex is too caught up in his own world." Edward held his granddaughter, feeling a resolve growing within him. For years he'd watched from the sidelines as Thomas systematically undermined Lily's confidence. He'd tried subtle interventions, offering encouragement and support when he could, but it wasn't enough. Something had to change. "Things won't always be this way," he promised her. "Sometimes the truth has a way of coming to light." As he watched Lily drive away, Edward made a decision. He was tired of watching his bright, capable granddaughter being torn down by a man who should have been building her up. It was time to understand why Thomas treated his daughter with such consistent disdain, and to put an end to it. Inside, Thomas was criticizing Lily for leaving early, making snide comments about her commitment and work ethic. Grace sat silently, her eyes fixed on her hands folded in her lap. Edward took his seat, observing Thomas with new eyes. What was he so afraid of? Why did he need to diminish his own daughter to feel secure? As he sipped his coffee and half listened to Thomas's self-aggrandizing stories, Edward began to form a plan. The truth, whatever it was, needed to come out. For Lily's sake, and perhaps for Thomas's too. 3 weeks passed since the uncomfortable family dinner. Lily had been avoiding her parents' calls, making excuses about work keeping her busy. But today was different. Today was her college graduation ceremony, and there was no avoiding it. Lily stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting the cap that sat atop her carefully styled hair. The black graduation gown hung loose on her frame. She'd lost weight in recent months from stress. Still, pride fluttered in her chest as she traced the gold honor cords draped around her shoulders. Summa cum laude. Despite everything, she'd done it. Her phone buzzed with a text from her grandfather. "Proud of you, kiddo. See you soon." Those simple words meant everything. Lily took a deep breath and grabbed her car keys, reminding herself that today was about her accomplishment, not her father's approval. The university lawn was packed with families and graduates when Lily arrived. The May sunshine warmed the air as she scanned the crowd, finally spotting her family near the back row of chairs. Edward waved enthusiastically, while Grace smiled and snapped photos. Thomas stood with his arms crossed, checking his watch. Alex, home from his first year of college, gave her a thumbs up. "There she is," Edward called, pulling Lily into a hug. "The graduate of the hour." "Thanks for coming, Grandpa," Lily whispered. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," he replied, his eyes crinkling with genuine pride. Grace fussed over Lily's gown, straightening it and wiping away a bit of lint. "You look beautiful, honey. We got here early to get good seats, but it filled up so fast." Thomas checked his watch again. "How long is this ceremony supposed to last?" "I've got a golf game at 3. Lily's smile faltered. "It's about 2 hours, Dad." He sighed heavily. "Should have brought the newspaper." Edward shot his son-in-law a hard look. "Your daughter is graduating with highest honors, Thomas. I think your golf game can wait." Before Thomas could respond, an announcement called for graduates to line up. Lily hurried away, her momentary happiness already dimming. Throughout the ceremony, Edward watched Lily on stage. When her name was called, followed by summa cum laude, he stood up and cheered loudly. Grace clapped enthusiastically while Alex whistled. Thomas gave a perfunctory clap, his attention on his phone. After the ceremony, families gathered on the lawn for photos and congratulations. Edward noticed how Lily's expression changed when she spotted them approaching, her smile becoming fixed and tense. "Congratulations, honey," Grace said, hugging her daughter. "We're so proud of you." "Thanks, Mom," Lily replied, her eyes darting nervously to her father. Thomas barely looked at her degree as she showed it to him. "Marketing, huh? Lot of competition in that field. Hope you got a job lined up." "I do, actually," Lily said, her voice steady despite the hurt in her eyes. "Remember I told you about the offer from Hayes & Partners? I start next month as a junior account manager." "Junior?" Thomas repeated with a slight smirk. "Well, everyone has to start somewhere, I suppose." Edward watched as Lily's shoulders slumped slightly. "Let's get some pictures." Grace interjected, clearly trying to smooth over the moment. As they posed for photos, Edward noticed other families around them. Fathers hugging their daughters tightly, parents wiping away proud tears, genuine celebration in their embraces. The contrast with Thomas's cold demeanor was stark and painful. "Let's go to lunch," Edward suggested. "My treat. Anywhere the graduate wants to go." "How about Riverside Grill?" Lily suggested. "I love their patio seating." "Perfect," Edward agreed quickly. Thomas frowned. "That place is overpriced, and I'll have to rush through lunch to make my tea time." "Then go play golf, Dad," Lily said quietly. The words slipped out before she could stop them. The group fell silent. Thomas's face darkened. "What did you say to me?" he asked, his voice low. Lily swallowed hard but didn't back down. "If your golf game is more important than celebrating my graduation, then you should just go." Edward felt a surge of pride at Lily's backbone, even as he braced for Thomas's reaction. "Well, excuse me for having prior commitments," Thomas snapped. "Not everything revolves around you, you know. Some of us have important things to do." Grace placed a hand on her husband's arm. "Thomas, please. It's her special day." "Special day," he scoffed. "It's a marketing degree, Grace. It's not like she cured cancer or became a surgeon." She took the easy way out like always. Several nearby families glanced over, uncomfortable witnesses to the scene unfolding. Lily's face flushed deep red. "I worked hard for this degree, Dad. I graduated top of my class." "In a soft major," Thomas retorted. "You chose the path of least resistance. That's always been your problem." Edward stepped forward, positioning himself slightly between Thomas and Lily. "That's enough, Thomas." "Stay out of this, Edward," Thomas warned. "She needs to hear the truth. Life isn't going to coddle her like you do." Lily's eyes filled with tears. For years she'd endured her father's criticism in private, but this public humiliation on what should have been one of the proudest days of her life was too much. "I have to go," she whispered, gathering her gown. "I told some friends I'd meet them for pictures." "Lily, wait," Grace called. But Lily was already walking away, her back straight despite the tears now streaming down her face. Alex looked bewildered. "Dad, why would you say that to her?" "She worked really hard." Thomas waved a dismissive hand. "She needs to toughen up. The real world is a lot harder than college." Edward watched Lily's retreating figure, something shifting inside him. For years he'd witnessed Thomas's treatment of his granddaughter, offering support and encouragement after the fact. but never directly challenging his son-in-law. That passive approach hadn't worked. Lily was withdrawing more with each cutting remark, her light dimming under her father's constant shadow. "I'm going to check on her," Edward said firmly. He found Lily sitting alone on a bench near the university fountain, still in her cap and gown, staring at her diploma. "Mind if I join you?" he asked softly. She quickly wiped her eyes. "I'm fine, Grandpa, really." "No, you're not," he said, sitting beside her. "And you shouldn't have to be." For a moment they sat in silence, watching other graduates and their families take photos by the fountain. "I don't know why I expected today to be different," Lily finally said. "Nothing I do will ever be good enough for him." Edward took her hand. "Your father has issues that have nothing to do with you, Lily. Nothing." "Then why does he only have these issues with me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Alex gets nothing but praise. It's always been that way." Edward considered his words carefully. "Have you noticed how your father talks about himself? All his accomplishments, all his successes. Never any failures or struggles?" Lily nodded. "And have you noticed," Edward continued, "that the things he criticizes most in you are the things he boasts most about in himself?" Lily looked up, realization dawning on her face. "He talks about how hard his college major was, how quickly he moved up in his company, how everyone respects him," Edward said. "And those are exactly the areas where he tears you down. You think he's threatened by me?" Lily asked incredulously. "I think," Edward said carefully, "that your father sees something in you that reminds him of parts of himself he's not comfortable with. And instead of facing those things, he projects them onto you." Lily was quiet for a long moment. "That doesn't make it hurt any less." "No, it doesn't," Edward agreed. "And it doesn't make it right." He watched as a family nearby celebrated with champagne, the father lifting his daughter in a bear hug that made her laugh. "I've been thinking," Edward said, "what if you took a break from the Sunday dinners? Just for a while." "Mom would be heartbroken," Lily said automatically. "Your mother enables his behavior," Edward replied, more sharply than he intended. "She loves you, but she's part of the problem," Lily sighed. "I've thought about stepping back. But it feels like letting him win somehow. It's not about winning or losing, kiddo. It's about protecting yourself until things change." "Things aren't going to change," Lily said flatly. "They never do." Edward felt a resolve hardening inside him. "Don't be so sure about that." That evening, after a celebration lunch with just Edward, Lily, and Alex, Grace had left to join Thomas for the remainder of his golf game. Edward drove home with a plan forming in his mind. For years he'd wondered about the source of Thomas's behavior toward Lily. The man's insistence on his own success, his seemingly perfect life story, had always seemed too polished to be true. As Edward pulled into his driveway, he made a decision. Thomas's treatment of Lily wasn't just unkind. It was damaging her in ways that might take years to heal. The pattern had gone on too long, and if no one else would stand up for Lily, then he would. It was time to dig into Thomas's past and uncover the truth. Whatever he found, Edward was certain of one thing. He would no longer stand by and watch his granddaughter be torn down by the man who should have been building her up. Edward sat in his small home office, surrounded by old photo albums and boxes of family memorabilia. 2 weeks had passed since Lily's graduation, and he hadn't been able to shake the image of her tear-stained face from his mind. Something had to be done about Thomas, and Edward was determined to understand the root of his son-in-law's behavior. He pulled out his phone and dialed Grace. If anyone had insight into Thomas's past, it would be his daughter. "Dad? Is everything okay?" Grace answered, sounding concerned about the unexpected call. "Everything's fine, sweetie. I was wondering if you could stop by today. There are some old family photos I found that I thought you might like." "Oh," Grace sounded relieved. "Sure, I can come around 3. Thomas is golfing again." "Perfect," Edward said, hanging up with a small smile. Thomas's predictable absence would make this conversation easier. At precisely 3 o'clock, Grace arrived carrying a plate of homemade cookies. She found her father in the living room with several photo albums spread out on the coffee table. "These look ancient," she commented, setting down the cookies and picking up a faded photograph of herself as a child. "Memory lane," Edward nodded. "But that's not really why I asked you to come." Grace looked up, confused. "It's not?" Edward took a deep breath. I want to talk about Thomas. Grace's face immediately tightened. Dad, if this is about what happened at Lily's graduation, it's about how he's treated her for years, Edward interrupted gently. And I think it's time we talked about why. Grace sank onto the couch, suddenly looking tired. He's just demanding. He wants the best for her. No. Edward shook his head firmly. That's not what this is. He tears her down, Grace, systematically, and you let it happen. His daughter's eyes filled with tears. You don't understand what it's like. Living with him? Edward leaned forward. Then help me understand. Tell me about his family, his past. There must be something that explains why he's so hard on Lily specifically. Grace was quiet for a long moment, twisting her wedding ring. He doesn't talk much about his childhood. I know his father was strict, military background. His mother was quiet, kept to herself. What about his education? His career? He's always bragging about both, but I've never heard any specific details. Grace shifted uncomfortably. What are you getting at, Dad? I'm not sure yet, Edward admitted. But I have a feeling Thomas isn't being honest about something. And whatever it is, it's causing him to project his issues onto Lily. Grace stood up suddenly. I should go. Thomas will be home soon. Edward caught her hand. Do you have any of his old school records? Yearbooks? Anything from before you met him? There's a box in our attic, Grace said hesitantly. From his parents' house after they died. I don't think he's ever gone through it. Edward squeezed her hand. Would you let me see it? Grace looked torn but finally nodded. I'll bring it next time Thomas is away on business. He's going to Chicago next Thursday for 3 days. Thank you, Edward said, hugging his daughter tightly. He could feel her trembling slightly, and it broke his heart. Whatever was going on with Thomas had clearly affected Grace deeply too. The following Thursday, Edward's doorbell rang early. Grace stood on the porch with a dusty cardboard box labeled Thomas School. I need to get back before he calls to check in, she said, handing over the box. Please be careful, Dad, if he found out. Edward nodded solemnly. I promise I'm only trying to help, Grace. For all of you. After she left, Edward carried the box to his kitchen table and carefully opened it. Inside were faded report cards, school newspapers, and various certificates. He began sorting through them methodically, looking for anything that might explain Thomas's behavior toward Lily. The first revelation came in the form of a high school transcript. Thomas had always claimed to be a straight-A student, boasting about his academic prowess, especially when criticizing Lily's performance. But the transcript told a different story, mostly C's with several D's in advanced courses. A handwritten note from a teacher mentioned struggles with challenging material and reluctance to seek help. Edward sat back, stunned. This didn't match Thomas's oft-repeated stories about being top of his class. Digging deeper, Edward found a university acceptance letter, not from the prestigious Ivy League school Thomas claimed to have attended, but from a small state college with far less rigorous admission standards. And beneath that, a letter of academic probation dated from his sophomore year. My God, Edward murmured. The pieces were starting to fit together. He continued through the box, finding a newspaper clipping that further unraveled Thomas's carefully constructed narrative. It was an article about a business award with a group photo of recipients. Thomas was there, but not as the youngest executive to win the Henderson Award as he'd claimed countless times. The caption identified him as Thomas Taylor, Assistant Regional Manager. Edward methodically documented each discovery, taking photos with his phone and making notes. The pattern was unmistakable. Thomas had systematically exaggerated or outright fabricated his achievements, creating a false history of excellence and success. But the most revealing item came at the bottom of the box, a worn journal with "Property of Thomas Taylor Sr." written on the cover. Thomas's father's diary, Edward hesitated. This felt invasive even for his mission, but remembering Lily's face at her graduation, he carefully opened the journal and began to read. The entries painted a vivid picture of Thomas's childhood. His father, a stern military man, had been mercilessly critical of his son, holding him to impossible standards and expressing constant disappointment. One entry particularly stood out. Thomas brought home another mediocre report card. C's and D's despite all the tutoring. Says he tried his best, but his best isn't good enough. Not in this family. The boy lacks discipline and intelligence. Not like his sister. Edward's heart sank as he read entry after entry documenting similar criticisms. The parallels to how Thomas treated Lily were unmistakable. The same dismissal of effort, the same impossible standards, the same comparison to a sibling. Thomas was repeating exactly what had been done to him. As evening fell, Edward carefully repacked the box, his mind racing. He now understood the source of Thomas's behavior. But understanding wasn't enough. He needed to find a way to break the cycle of emotional abuse being passed from generation to generation. He picked up his phone and dialed Lily. "Grandpa, everything okay?" Her voice sounded tired. "Just checking in, kiddo. How's the new job going?" "It's good, busy. The team seems to like my ideas." "That's wonderful," Edward said warmly. "Listen, your birthday's coming up next month. What do you say we have a special dinner? Just family." There was a long pause. "I don't know, Grandpa. After what happened at graduation..." "Trust me," Edward said. "I think it's important, and I promise things will be different this time." After some gentle persuasion, Lily agreed, though he could hear the reluctance in her voice. Over the next few weeks, Edward prepared carefully. He met with Grace again, sharing what he'd discovered and discussing his plan. She was initially horrified, then defensive, and finally resigned. "He'll never admit any of this," she warned. "He believes his own stories now." "Maybe," Edward conceded. "But Lily deserves the truth. And honestly, so does Thomas. Living a lie has poisoned him. And it's poisoning your family." Grace couldn't argue with that. Edward also visited Alex, filling him in on parts of what he'd discovered. The young man was shocked but quick to support the plan to help his sister. "I always knew Dad was harder on Lily," Alex admitted. "But I never understood why. I just stayed out of it." "We've all enabled his behavior," Edward said gently, "but now we have a chance to change things." The night before Lily's birthday dinner, Edward sat alone in his living room reviewing everything he'd discovered. He felt nervous about confronting Thomas, but the stakes were too high to back down. This wasn't just about exposing lies, it was about healing a family that had been fractured by them. He picked up his phone to check one final piece of information, something that had been nagging at him about Thomas's supposed executive position. After a quick search and a few clicks, he found what he was looking for. Confirmation that Thomas had been passed over for promotion twice in the past 5 years. His actual job title was nowhere near as impressive as he claimed. Edward sighed deeply. Tomorrow would be difficult but necessary. He only hoped that once the truth was exposed, there would be a path forward for all of them, especially Lily, who had suffered the most from Thomas's displaced insecurities. As he prepared for bed, Edward glanced at a photo of Lily on his nightstand. Her high school graduation, her smile bright and hopeful before years of her father's criticism had dimmed it. He made a silent promise to her and to himself. After tomorrow, Thomas would never humiliate her again. The restaurant Edward had chosen for Lily's 25th birthday dinner was upscale but comfortable, white tablecloths and soft lighting, but not so fancy that it felt stiff. He'd reserved a private room in the back, knowing that privacy might be important for what he planned to do tonight. Edward arrived first, 45 minutes early. He placed a small folder on the table beside his seat, then spoke briefly with the server about the cake he'd ordered. Everything was set. Lily arrived next, wearing a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes. Edward noticed she'd done her hair differently, more confident and less like she was trying to hide behind it. "Happy birthday." "Kiddo," he said, hugging her tightly. "Thanks, Grandpa," she replied, looking around nervously. "Is anyone else here yet?" "Not yet. But I wanted a few minutes with you first." Edward pulled out a small wrapped box. "This is just from me. I thought you might want to open it privately." Lily carefully unwrapped the gift, revealing a delicate silver locket. When she opened it, she gasped softly. Inside was a photo of her as a little girl, sitting on Edward's lap, both of them laughing. "I remember this day," she whispered. "We went fishing and I caught that huge catfish." Edward nodded. "You were so proud. And I was proud of you." He took her hand. "I've always been proud of you, Lily. Every step of the way." Tears welled in her eyes. "Thank you. For everything." "There's something else I want to say," Edward continued, his voice gentle but serious. "Things might get a little intense tonight. Whatever happens, remember that you are enough. You've always been enough, okay?" Lily looked confused but nodded. Before she could ask questions, the door opened and Grace and Alex walked in. "Happy birthday, honey," Grace exclaimed, hugging her daughter and handing her a gift bag. "Hey sis," Alex said, giving her a side hug. "Quarter of a century, huh?" As they settled into their seats, the tension in the air was palpable. Grace kept glancing at Edward nervously while Alex seemed unusually quiet. "Dad's running late," Grace explained. "He had a call with Chicago that went long." "Chicago?" Edward asked innocently. "I thought that trip was last week." "It was," Grace replied. "This is follow-up. Something about the Peterson account." Edward nodded, filing away this new lie. Thomas had been adding more and more fictional achievements to his resume lately. 20 minutes later, as they were finishing their appetizers, Thomas finally arrived. He didn't apologize for his lateness, instead launching into a story about how important his call had been. "The CEO himself wanted my input," Thomas boasted, straightening his tie. "Said my presentation last week changed their whole marketing strategy." Edward noticed Lily shrinking slightly in her chair, her earlier confidence fading in her father's dominating presence. "Let's order," Grace suggested quickly. "It's getting late." As they ate their main courses, the conversation stayed superficial. Thomas dominated most of it, talking about his golf game, his work successes, and occasionally asking Alex about baseball. He barely acknowledged Lily except to make a comment about her starter job and ask if she was still enjoying playing at marketing. Edward watched Lily's face carefully, saw how each dismissive comment landed like a small blow. He waited until they had finished eating before clearing his throat. "Before we have cake, I'd like to make a toast," Edward said, raising his glass. "To Lily on her 25th birthday." Everyone raised their glasses, even Thomas, though he looked impatient. "Lily," Edward continued, "I've watched you grow from a curious little girl into an accomplished young woman. You graduated with highest honors from university. You've already been promoted at your new job, quite an achievement for someone only a month in," Thomas snorted softly, and Edward fixed him with a sharp look. "You know, Thomas," Edward said, his voice deceptively casual, "I've been thinking a lot about success lately, about what it really means." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sure we'd all love to hear your philosophical musings, Edward, but it's getting late, and I have an early meeting tomorrow." "This won't take long," Edward promised, his eyes never leaving his son-in-law's face. "I've just been wondering why you feel the need to lie about your achievements." The table went silent. Lily's eyes widened, darting between her grandfather and her father. "What are you talking about?" Thomas demanded, his face reddening. Edward reached for the folder beside his chair. "I've been doing some research. Interesting things turn up when you dig a little." "Dad," Grace said warningly, but Edward continued. "You didn't graduate from Princeton, did you, Thomas? You went to state college and were on academic probation your sophomore year." Thomas's face had gone from red to white. "You went through my personal things? And you weren't the youngest executive to win the Henderson Award." "According to this newspaper article," Edward slid a printout across the table, "you were an assistant regional manager who happened to be in the photo." Lily stared at the article, then at her father, shock written across her face. "This is ridiculous," Thomas sputtered. "You're taking things out of context, am I?" Edward pulled out more papers. "Your high school transcript shows mostly C's and D's. Your father's journal details how disappointed he was in your academic performance, especially compared to your sister." Thomas's hands were shaking now. "You had no right." "I had every right," Edward cut in, his voice hard. "You've been tearing down your daughter for years, making her feel like she's never good enough. And now I understand why. You're projecting your own failures onto her." Alex looked stunned. "Dad, is this true?" Thomas slammed his hand on the table. "This is absurd. I won't sit here and be ambushed on what's supposed to be a celebration." "That's the point, Thomas," Edward said quietly. "It should be a celebration. But you can't stand to see Lily succeed because it reminds you of your own inadequacies." Lily sat frozen, her eyes wide and shining with unshed tears. "You were treated the same way by your father," Edward continued, his voice softening slightly. "He criticized everything you did, compared you unfavorably to your sister, made you feel worthless. And instead of breaking that cycle, you've perpetuated it with Lily." Thomas stood up, knocking his chair backward. "I don't have to listen to this." "Yes, you do," Grace said suddenly, her voice stronger than anyone had heard in years. "For once, you're going to listen." Thomas stared at his wife in disbelief. You've been passed over for promotion twice in the past 5 years, Edward continued relentlessly. You're not an executive. You're a mid-level manager who's been stuck in the same position for nearly a decade. Stop, Thomas whispered, but there was no force behind it anymore. And the sad thing is, Edward said, none of that would matter if you had just been honest. There's no shame in being ordinary, Thomas. The shame is in lying about it and then punishing your daughter for reminding you of the truth. The room fell silent. Thomas sank back into his chair, looking suddenly older and smaller. Lily's voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper. All these years? You made me feel like I was never good enough. Like I was a disappointment. Thomas couldn't meet her eyes. Do you know what that did to me? Lily continued, her voice gaining strength. How many nights I cried. How many opportunities I didn't pursue because I was afraid of failing. Of confirming what you always told me, that I wasn't smart enough, wasn't driven enough, wasn't good enough. Thomas stared at the table. I just wanted you to be better than me, he said finally, his voice breaking. To not make the same mistakes? By destroying her confidence? Edward asked. By making her feel worthless? Thomas had no answer. The irony, Edward said gently, is that Lily has already achieved more honestly than you ever did with your lies. She graduated top of her class for real. She earned her promotion for real. She doesn't need to exaggerate or fabricate her accomplishments. And that terrifies you, doesn't it? A tear slid down Thomas's cheek. It was the first time any of them had ever seen him cry. Grace reached for her husband's hand. Thomas, it's time to stop. Time to be honest. With us and with yourself. The silence that followed was heavy with decades of lies and hurt, but also with the possibility of truth and healing. Finally, Thomas looked up at Lily. I'm sorry, he said, the words sounding rusty and unpracticed. I don't know how to be different. You start by telling the truth, Edward said. All of it. And then you get help to break the cycle. Lily wiped her own tears away. I needed a father who was proud of me, she said quietly. Who built me up instead of tearing me down. I know, Thomas whispered. I know that now. As the waiter appeared with the birthday cake, the candles casting a warm glow over the table, Edward realized this was not the end of the story. There would be more difficult conversations, more painful truths to face. Thomas had decades of patterns to unlearn, and Lily had deep wounds that would take time to heal. But looking at his granddaughter's face, seeing the mix of hurt, relief, and cautious hope there, Edward knew that exposing the truth had been the right thing to do. For the first time in years, he saw the possibility of real change for this family. As Lily closed her eyes to make a wish, Edward hoped she was wishing for the same thing he was, the courage to build something new from the ashes of what had been broken. The weeks following Lily's birthday dinner were painfully quiet. Thomas had retreated into himself, barely speaking to anyone. Grace walked around the house like a ghost, torn between decades of enabling her husband and her growing realization of how much damage had been done to her daughter. Lily threw herself into her work, avoiding family gatherings entirely. Only Edward and Alex maintained regular contact, checking in on everyone and trying to hold the fractured family together somehow. It was Alex who finally broke the silence, showing up at his sister's apartment one rainy Saturday afternoon with takeout and determination. You can't avoid us. Forever, he said as Lily reluctantly let him. And I'm not avoiding you, she replied, taking the bag of Chinese food from his hands. Just processing. They sat at her small kitchen table, the rain tapping against the windows as they ate in silence for a few minutes. Dad's a mess, Alex finally said. Lily poked at her lo mein. Good. No, I mean, he's really struggling. Mom says he's barely sleeping. He just sits in his office staring at old photos. Am I supposed to feel sorry for him? Lily asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Alex shook his head. No, you get to be angry. You've earned that. He paused. But he's trying to get help. He started seeing a therapist last week. Lily looked up, genuine surprise on her face. Dad in therapy? Twice a week, Alex confirmed. And he's talking about taking a leave of absence from work. Apparently he had some kind of breakdown in a meeting when someone asked about his Princeton days. Lily set down her fork, unsure how to feel about this information. For so long she had imagined her father as invincible, untouchable in his tower of judgment and criticism. The image of him broken down enough to seek help was hard to reconcile with the man who had tormented her for years. "I don't know if I can forgive him," she admitted quietly. "No one's asking you to," Alex said. "Not yet anyway. But Grandpa thought you should know. He says healing can't start without truth, but it also can't continue without awareness." Lily smiled faintly. "That sounds like Grandpa." The rain continued to fall as brother and sister talked more openly than they had in years. Alex apologized for not standing up for her more, for accepting the family dynamic that hurt her so deeply. Lily admitted her resentment toward him for being their father's favorite. There were tears, but also moments of surprising laughter as they remembered happier times from their childhood. Before he left, Alex handed Lily an envelope. "Dad asked me to give you this. No pressure to read it or respond. He just wanted you to have it." Lily took the envelope but didn't open it until much later that night. Inside was a handwritten letter, the paper creased and spotted as if tears had fallen on it while it was being written. "Lily," it began, "I don't know how to write this letter. I've started and stopped a dozen times. Words have always been weapons for me, not tools for healing, but I'm trying to learn. What your grandfather said was true, all of it. I've lived a life built on lies because the truth was too painful to face. I wasn't smart enough. I wasn't successful enough. I wasn't enough, period. My father made sure I knew that every day of my childhood, and instead of breaking that cycle, I continued it with you. I see now what I've done, how I've hurt you. There's no excuse, but maybe there's an explanation. I was terrified by your potential. Your real achievements highlighted my fabricated ones. Every success you had threatened the house of cards I'd built. I'm getting help now. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, facing myself honestly. I don't expect forgiveness. I haven't earned it. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying to change. Not for me, but for you. Because you deserve a father who can see your light without trying to dim it. With regret and hope, Dad." Lily read the letter 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it in her bedside drawer. She didn't cry. She didn't call her father. But that night she slept more peacefully than she had in years. 3 months passed. Spring turned to summer. Lily received another promotion at work and bought her first car. Small victories that she celebrated with Edward and Alex. She saw her mother occasionally for lunch. Careful conversations that skirted around the elephant in the room. She hadn't seen her father since the birthday dinner. Edward kept her updated, though. Thomas was still in therapy. He had taken a step back at work, admitting to his colleagues that he didn't have a Princeton degree. He was attending a support group for men struggling with anger and emotional regulation. Small steps, but steps nonetheless. It was a warm July evening when Lily's phone rang with her father's number. She stared at it for 4 rings before answering. "Hello? Lily." His voice sounded different, less confident, more real. "Thank you for picking up. What do you need, Dad?" She asked, neither warm nor cold. Your mother and I are hosting a small dinner on Saturday. Nothing special. Just family. I was hoping you might come." Lily hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." "I understand," Thomas said quickly. "No pressure. I just miss you." The words hung in the air between them, unfamiliar and raw. "I'll think about it," Lily finally said. After hanging up, she called Edward. "Do you think I should go?" she asked after explaining the invitation. "What does your heart tell you?" her grandfather replied. Lily thought about it. "That I'm curious, and scared, and not ready to forgive yet." "You don't have to forgive to be curious," Edward said wisely. "And being scared is normal. Change is scary, both in ourselves and in others. Will you come with me?" she asked. "As a buffer?" "Of course, kiddo. Whatever you need." Saturday arrived and Lily found herself standing on her parents' porch, Edward beside her. She had changed her outfit 3 times, finally settling on a simple sundress that made her feel confident. Grace opened the door, her face lighting up at the sight of her daughter. "You came," she breathed, pulling Lily into a hug that felt more genuine than any they'd shared in years. The house looked different somehow. Photos Lily hadn't seen before were displayed in the living room. Pictures of her college graduation, her first apartment, her receiving an award in high school. Her presence in the family home, once minimized, was now visibly celebrated. Thomas was in the kitchen, wearing an apron and looking less polished than Lily had ever seen him. He had lost weight and there was gray in his hair that hadn't been there before. "I'm making pasta," he said awkwardly when he saw her. "Your favorite. The one with the sun-dried tomatoes and spinach." "You remembered," Lily said, surprised. "I'm trying to remember a lot of things I should have paid attention to before." Dinner was stilted at first, everyone carefully choosing their words. But as the evening progressed, something shifted. Thomas didn't dominate the conversation. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. When Lily mentioned her promotion, he didn't diminish it with comparisons or backhanded compliments. "That's wonderful," he said simply. "You've always had a gift for understanding what people need." After dinner, as Edward and Grace cleared the dishes, Thomas hesitantly asked Lily to join him in the backyard. They sat on the old porch swing, the same one where he had once told her that her dream of becoming a writer was impractical and naive. "I found this," he said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "Your mother was going through some old boxes and, well, here," Lily unfolded the paper. It was a story she had written in 4th grade, a fantasy tale about a girl who could talk to animals. Her teacher had given it an A+ and written, "Wonderful imagination. You're a talented writer. I told you to focus on practical subjects instead," Thomas said quietly. "I shut down your passion because my father had done the same to me with music. I wanted to play the piano, but he said music was for dreamers, not achievers." He looked at his hands. "I've been working with my therapist on identifying these patterns. Breaking them is harder than I thought it would be." "At least you're trying," Lily acknowledged. Thomas nodded. "I am, every day." He paused. "I know it's too late for some things. I can't give you back the childhood you deserved or undo the damage I caused. But I want you to know that I see you now. Really see you. And I'm proud of who you are. Who you became despite me, not because of me." Tears pricked at Lily's eyes, but she blinked them back. "I don't know if we can ever have a normal relationship, Dad." "I know," Thomas said. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, just maybe a chance to try something new, something healthier." As they swung gently in the evening breeze, Lily didn't make any promises, but she didn't get up and walk away either. 2 years passed. Healing didn't happen overnight. There were setbacks and difficult conversations, tears and doubts. Thomas continued therapy, slowly unlearning toxic patterns and facing the lies he'd built his life around. Grace found her voice, no longer enabling her husband's behavior but holding him accountable. Alex became a stronger brother, no longer accepting the favored child role at his sister's expense, and Lily? She built boundaries and held them firm. She pursued her passion for writing alongside her marketing career, publishing her first short story in a literary magazine. She learned to trust her own voice, to believe in her worth without external validation. Edward watched it all with quiet pride. At 78, he had seen enough of life to know that true change was rare but possible. The family gatherings were different now, more honest, sometimes uncomfortable, but ultimately more real. At one such gathering, celebrating Edward's birthday, he watched as Thomas approached Lily with a gift. It was a beautiful leather-bound journal embossed with her initials. "For your writing," Thomas said simply. "Your real talent." The smile that passed between father and daughter wasn't one of complete healing. Some wounds run too deep for that. But it held something that had never been there before. Mutual respect and the beginning of understanding. As Edward blew out his birthday candles, he didn't need to make a wish. The thing he had wished for at Lily's birthday 2 years ago was already coming true before his eyes. Not perfect, but real. Not complete, but beginning. And sometimes beginnings were the most beautiful part of any story.